I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Erin Shea, and I'm the head of adult programming here at the library. Thank you so much for being here tonight as we continue our Fall Meet the Author series. I'd also like to thank my colleague Jennifer Dayton for helping to organize this event tonight. Programs at Darien Library are made possible by contributions to our annual Friends of the Library campaign, so thank you for your continued support to help make our collections and programs available to the community. We have a very special evening planned for you. Tonight's guest was awarded the Penn Center USA Award for Literary Fiction in 2004 and the American Book Award for her novel Crescent. She's the author of 4 other books, including The Language of Baklava, a culinary memoir, and most recently, Birds of Paradise. This novel is the story of a runaway daughter and how her absence affects the lives of her mother, father, and brother. But the subject of teen runaways is not the only theme explored in this novel. The detailed descriptions of culinary creations her character Avis bakes instigate a Pavlovian reaction, at least in myself. Cinnamon palmiers, chopped pastilles, 7-layered opera cakes. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to read my favorite review of the book from Ron Charles at the Washington Post. This delicious new novel weighs less than 2 pounds, but you may gain more than that by reading it. If you know her cream-filled work, especially Crescent and The Language of Baklava, you're already salivating. This Jordanian-American author writes about food so enticingly that her book should be published on sheets of phyllo dough. Birds of Paradise contains her most mouth-watering writing ever, but it's no light after-dinner treat. This is a full-course meal, a rich, complex, and memorable story that will leave you lingering gratefully at her table. And we are indeed so grateful to linger at her table tonight. Please join me in welcoming to Darien Library, Miss Diana Abu-Jaber.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here tonight. It's such a pleasure to read a library. I was just talking about how there's something really special about this kind of environment. I always feel like I'm with real book lovers at library events, and people who have sort of a deep appreciation of the whole literary experience. So it's really special for me to be able to come out and talk with you tonight. I'm going to read a short segment from the book, and then I would love it if you had questions or comments or anything that you would like to throw out there. And yeah, the book, it's set in Miami, and it is about a family with 2 children. There's a dutiful son and then a daughter who is ethereally beautiful. She's unnaturally beautiful. And when she's 13 years old, she vanishes from the family. And then over the next 5 years, she reappears from time to time to connect with her mother, and she will call her to have a meeting with her, but she won't give her any information about where she's gone or what's happened to her, and she won't accept any assistance. And this rather torturous process goes on for the mother and the rest of the family over the next 5 years. And so the book opens when the daughter, Felice, is about to turn 18, and it's almost like the family is facing another loss again, because it's as if by becoming an adult, they are looking at the loss of their daughter's childhood. And in the section I thought I'd read to you from, Avis, the mother, the pastry chef, is talking with one of the neighbors. And this neighbor is interesting because she just appeared in the neighborhood, also somewhat mysteriously. She is a refugee. She is exiled from Haiti. And she appears in this Anglo enclave of Coral Gables. Seems like a real fish out of water. And Avis becomes really entranced by her, very, very interested. And they strike up this extremely unlikely friendship. And in this scene, Avis is talking to Solange about if there's any possible way that Solange can help her bring her daughter back. Because Avis has become so desperate, she's almost willing to think magically that there's some kind of spell she can cast or something magical she can do. Even though she knows this is not rational, this is ridiculous, she still hopes against all rationality. So I will read this short section to you. Red black petals, a wooden pencil case, a small purple satin sash, a string of beads with a delicate white cross. Solange moves around the house collecting and placing items in a canvas bag. She asks Avis to then take her to her own kitchen. They cross the yard again. Avis leads Solange through the French doors and then the door to the right. She feels self-conscious over the cool beauty of the room, afraid she'll be offended by such a display of wealth, and watches Solange as she turns, not touching anything. But she simply asks, "Where are your husband and son? This would work better if they were with us." Avis imagines their reaction to Solange and her spell casting, if that's what this is. Brian, she's fairly certain, would be mortified. And Stanley, it seems, would be curious, polite, and distracted. She extracts an old photograph of herself, Brian, and her son on some sort of excursion. Solange studies it and then includes it with the other items. Now, what would you make for your daughter? If she were to come home tomorrow, what would it be? For a moment, Avis is motionless, intimidated, studying the cold tang of the stainless bowls, their perfect emptiness. Solange picks a small bowl out of its nest and hands this to Avis. "Don't think so much," she says. Avis takes the bowl, coolness on her fingertips. She has no mise, no utensils. She reaches into the flour and sugar with clean hands, running her fingers through powder. Her palms warm the butter. She pours in a drop of almond extract, then splits a vanilla pod with her paring knife, scraping in the seed caviar. It's one of the simplest cakes that she knows how to make. Solange leans against the counter as Avis stirs wet ingredients into dry, making batter. "Where I grew up," Solange says, "sugar is a luxury. Though I didn't know this until I left the great house. Then I discovered the people where I'm from, they live and die in these magnificent cane fields." She idly turns one of the bowls on the counter. "Sugar is like a compass. It points to trouble. My husband used to travel to plantations across the border, the other side of the island, until the new man came to power, and then people began to find the cutters' bodies in the fields." Avis is afraid to look at Solange. The air is tinted with sugar vapor. It is, of course, the one irreducible element in her work, no matter what else is added, which is what makes sugar such a strong thing, Solange says. Sweet in the mouth, terrible to the body. The cane cutters never get to taste it, never like this. She draws one finger through the sparkling crystals. As she works, Avis feels as if the woman's voice has set something loose in her, a private mourning. Her spoon turns a long ribbon through the batter, heavier and heavier. Avis's private tragedy, with all its pain, seems to shrink. She begins to wonder if there's any point at all to pastry work. It's irrelevant, isn't it? It's absurd, ease and comfort. Lotus eating, her son called it. Escapism, gluttony, corruption, self-indulgence. He never adds sugar to his coffee. Avis isn't stirring correctly. Her hands feel weak. Finally, Solange takes the bowl from her and pours it into the cake pan. She slides it into the hot oven and lets the heavy door rumble shut. When the cake is cool enough to box, they take it to Avis's car, Solange on the passenger side. She says, "Where is the last place you saw her?" Avis places her hands on the steering wheel. The first time she saw her daughter, after she'd run away for good, Felice was taller and slimmer. Her hair was longer. She'd been away from home for 6 months, long enough to be physically changed. A deep shaking began in the quick of Avis's bones. She was torn between the need to touch her daughter and the sense that even the lightest touch might cause her to flee back to her underworld. There was a new downturned shadow to Felice's mouth, and her lowered eyelashes cast crescents of shadow on her cheeks. She had a faintly exhausted quality which trickled through her posture. She could have been 14 or 28. She was poised, self-possessed. As soon as she folded her limbs onto the cafe chair across from Avis, she'd said, "I'd like to make a deal with you." Avis sat motionless, staggered by the moment, barely able to hear or think, while her daughter explained the deal. Felice would agree to more of these meetings, occasional, entirely at her whim, but in exchange, Avis and Brian had to agree to stop. Stop? Avis felt so slow, the word blurred and heavy. Here was her daughter before her, talking to her as if nothing at all had happened. Here was Felice. Stop looking for me. Stop trying to make me come back. Stop hiring people to find me. You have to give up now. Felice's tone was like a chip of ice. Because I'm happy with the way things are, and I am never, ever coming home again. Felice gazed at her mother with an expression so entirely frank, so separate, that it seemed to Avis that she felt a wave of particles rising and twisting. Each particle was a bit of memory. Every second that she'd held the child between her arms, inhaled the scent of her scalp, kissed her shoulders, pressed the drowsy face to her chest, the consummate intimacy of feeding a child this way, all of it rising, curling, as this extraordinary face told her, stop. Could it be that she'd always been a little afraid of her own daughter, that she simply didn't know how to fight her? The terrible fact presented itself. Avis had no choice but to accept. The lady of the house. She did all she could to take me away from my mother. She told me my mother was ignorant, but I saw how my mother knew every plant in the garden like the lady of the house knew the words in her books. There's rain on the street and occasional ripples of light. Avis can only steal glimpses of Solange as she speaks, her profile nearly invisible beside the rain-streaked glass. I was 17 when I met Jonas. The lady sent me into Cap Haitian with the driver for some dried hibiscus for tea. We could have picked it right in the field, but she said that kind wasn't good. Back then, Jonas worked in the market in town, selling spices in big cloth sacks. When she found out about him, the lady said, of course, that he was filthy and uneducated, the same thing she said about my mother. She wanted me to stay in the house. She said, you are almost a daughter to me. Solange gave a laugh, like a sniff. My mother told me, if you're lucky enough to know what you want, then you must chase it. I left the house and the gardens and the stone veranda that overlooked the ocean, places I'd known all my life, and I went to live with Jonas in a house with a cracked cement floor and a patched tin roof, no electricity. We had to take our waste out in tin pails and pour it into the alley that ran behind the house. The rain tapers off as they approach Miami Beach. Trails of water stand in the street, a mist thrown up between the cars. It felt like my life's door had opened. When my son was born, I began making my bush teas and medicines to help him thrive. Jonas said these brought him even more customers at market than his spices did. My mother came to visit one time to see her grandson. It took her 6 hours to walk to us. She said the lady of the house was ill and she couldn't stay away for very long. I understood. The lady was like a difficult family member. You might dislike them, but you can't leave them. Solange is silent as they cross the causeway, the bands of traffic curving over the diamond water. I've never seen this water before, she murmurs, only from the airplane. They drive into town and park in the city lot, then walk to Lincoln Road. It looks different to Avis, so late in the day, wilder somehow. She edges toward Solange, away from the spill of shop lights and electrical music. Beside Solange, seeing with her eyes, Avis feels as if an unacknowledged horror in things rises more forcefully to the surface. But Solange swings her arms as they walk, looking around. She says, "I wish the lady of the house could have seen this. She wouldn't have thought she was quite so fine as she did." They make their way up the street as far as the fans' whirl of shadows on the sidewalk. Avis stops and gestures to the tables. "There, that's where we meet." There's a desolation about the place now. Avis senses a weight as if all of it is sinking into the earth with all her empty hours of waiting. Solange takes in the tables in the diner, the scene washed in late, limpid sunlight, then plucks at Avis's sleeve. "Come away. Let's see some more." They weave through the crowds, Avis hurrying to keep up with Solange. She holds a shopping bag that bounces against her legs and bumps into passers-by. She feels sweat at her temples. The sky is hazy blue with clouds like fine scratches. They hover at the busy edge of Ocean Drive, waiting for the light. And then Solange turns and reaches to take hold of Avis's hand. She keeps her strong fingers on her as they cross the street and make their way toward the beach. Avis doesn't come here. She hasn't been this close to the water since she'd agreed to Felice's terms years ago. Avis had gone home and told Brian about Felice's demands. For the first time in months, it seemed the two of them were too drained to fight each other. Brian shook his head, saying, "That's ridiculous. Just let her go?" No way. There's got to be something else we can do. And Avis said, "Please, tell me what it is, and I'll do it. Anything. She felt the fight slipping away from them. Talking about it was running through sand, trying to stand in breakers. Gradually, they stopped speaking with police and school officials and neighborhood watch groups, and Avis never went to the beach again. She's surprised now by the warmth she can feel in the sand. She slips off her clogs, stepping through it. The late afternoon light is tinged with mauve. "The water smells different here," Solange says. There are still small groups of college kids on towels, but most of the tourists are packing up, lugging folding chairs, a pleasant weariness rising from their burned shoulders. Solange sweeps a patch of sand with her hand and then sits, knees gathered to her chest. Avis hovers and then finally sits, the bag with its cake between them. Solange stares into the widening band at the edge of water and then shifts her gaze to the sand. "It's been so long since I visited the water," she says. "I grew up beside it, but after so many years, I thought I might even forget it." She rakes her fingers through the sand. "It's good to feel like this now." "Like what?" "Like nothing." She smiles. "When I came here, I came with nothing." She glances at Avis and then begins unpacking the items in her bag. She touches each one to her forehead and then hands it to Avis. "Think about what you would like to say now to your daughter." Avis takes the small jar with its clear fluid, but she can't think of anything to say. Mostly there's blankness, as Solange puts it. Nothing. Still, she touches the things, the scissors, the sash, the prayer book, and she hands each item back to Solange. "Good," she says. "Fine, and now what you need to do, you take the cake and you break it up. Scatter it over the water for the birds and fishes." She points to the waves. "You talk to your daughter as you scatter it." "My cake? You mean just break it up?" Solange's face is impassive. "However you can do it." Avis stands and reaches into the bag, carefully lifting the cake with her fingers. She holds it in both hands and walks down the incline to the water. The sand looks beige against the dark foam of the surf, and Avis hesitates a moment before wading in. The water is warm and easy, and the bottom smooth. She's able to make her way through the small breakers with little trouble. She walks until the water approaches her hips, her work pants balloon around her. The thought comes how she might have viewed a scene like this in the past. Sentimental. Maudlin. Happy birthday, Felice. Bitter little words. Avis holds the cake and then she digs in with her fingers. It crumples instantly and she has a memory then, not of her daughter, but of spreading handfuls of her mother's ashes into Cayuga Lake. So cold that March, it was still frozen in spots. And she had balanced on the steeply banked shore, almost doubled over from cold, flinging the ashes with stiff red fingers. Now she tosses cake crumbs everywhere, her breath chugging as if she were sobbing. The sound bounces over the waves. She knows that this ritual is not for getting her daughter back. There's a sparkle of efflorescence on the water's surface just a few feet away. She wades in deeper toward the bubbles and then feels an uncanny shimmer against her calves. A school of fish is swarming her, feeding on the crumbs. She watches them, minute flickerings beneath the surface. A bit of cake bobs on the water, rising and falling. She sinks to her chin, and then she lifts her feet and lets her head dunk under the water, so the echo fills her ears, the thrombotic pulse of it. She opens her eyes to an indigo blur and considers the pleasure of opening her throat and lungs, the scorch in her chest, and the release of drowning. Avis tilts her head back then and pushes off the sandy bottom. She breaks the surface in time to see a ragged shadow plummet, and it's a seagull, big, white, snapping up the cake and lobbing back high up into the sky. And I'll stop there. Thank you. So that gives you a little taste of what I'm up to in the book, and kind of a turning point for the characters. But I would love it if you had questions for me or anything you'd like to put out there. That's always interesting to hear what people are thinking. Yes?
What was your inspiration?
My inspiration. Well, a couple things, really. One big thing was that we had moved to Miami about 4 years before I started writing this book. And at the same time, my husband and I were talking about starting a family. And we'd put it off a long time. And we were really nervous. We were just really scared about it. And we were trying to figure out what we were so afraid of. And of course now I know there's lots of things to be scared of, with good reason. But at the time, I kind of put it together that a lot of the stuff that was in the news, a lot of the things I was seeing on the local news, missing children, runaway kids, all these disappearances. And it occurred to me that really that was one of my biggest nightmares as a parent, would be to imagine what it would be like to have a child who ran away from home. And that just the idea of, you know, as a parent you take for granted that you can just like send your child to their room, you know, just have this easy kind of connection, this invisible tether, if you will, that that I think a lot of us take for granted is between parents and children. And what happens if it breaks? You know, what happens if you lose that invisible connection? So I started kind of chasing a fear. I was chasing this is my parental nightmare book, basically. And I think that I was trying to get braver by writing it. I think that I knew that I was afraid, and I knew that the people in this book needed to get braver. So I took it on as a way to see if I could chase down a fear, a personal fear. Yeah. Yes?
I wonder if you could tell us what the title of the book means.
Well, the Birds of Paradise There are several layers to it. Most of you probably know there's a flower, the birds of paradise flower.
It's in the bouquet.
Oh, that's awesome, you guys. Wow. That is so super cool. No one's ever done that. Wow. I love that. Well, Exhibit A. So there's a bird of paradise flower. There's also an actual bird called the bird of paradise, there are different species found in different parts of the world. And then there are legends about the bird of paradise. There's one old legend that the bird of paradise is a bird without legs, and it can never land. It must continually, be in flight, and so it's kind of entrapped by its beauty, and that is a big metaphor for this book, because the daughter who runs away is so exquisitely beautiful that it kind of becomes a cage for her. And part of the reason, I think, I'm just the author, but I think that she runs away is because her mother, the pastry chef, is so obsessed with beauty in the world. She is such a lover of beautiful pastries especially, but all beauty, that she fails to really see her daughter. And I'm very interested in that, the way we all need to be seen in a deep way, for who we are, versus that outer shell, the veneer that we present all the time and work on and maintain, and it's so much work, when really the truth of us is something that transcends appearance and is somehow within. So the bird of paradise is a bird that is lovely but trapped. And Miami itself is a kind of bird of paradise. People talk about Miami as paradise. And it is, in many ways, it is a very, very beautiful city. And in many ways, it's trapped by its own obsession with beauty. It is so obsessed with beauty and beautiful people and a beautiful life that it pays for that obsession with its soul. And people think there's nothing to it. People think, Miami's a joke. It's something for the Travel Channel. It's girls dancing on tabletops in bikinis. And it is that. But it's also real communities and people struggling just like any other place. And they have become somewhat entrapped by this metaphor of beauty. So it's at play in a number of different facets in the book. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yes.
I was interested in Felice's life on the streets.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know, are there such things as models for a day that Gap goes out and searches kids off the street to be a model? And is that the kind of life that runaways who are in Miami lead? I mean, I'm sure they're sleeping on the beach and things like that, but I'm curious about it.
Well, let me tease apart some of that for you. I did a lot of research for the character of Felice, because she runs away from home, but she only goes as far as Miami Beach. Her parents are living in Coral Gables, so it's kind of a funny runaway. She runs away, but not really away. She's just across the causeway, essentially. And she stays there, and she becomes a model, but she does pickup work, and she just does it for a day. She'll do a little catalog work, a little bit of this and that for different stores. She models tattoos. She lets people airbrush tattoos on her body, and then she'll sit out at a cafe and model them. And what I did in terms of research was I went to Miami Beach, and I spent a lot of time out on the beach with the street kid culture there. And I found that there was this whole subculture of kids who kind of fly beneath the radar. They are not affiliated with like rescue missions or shelters. They band together. They live in really squats. They're dilapidated, abandoned buildings. They try to take care of each other. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. And I spent some time just talking to them, listening to their stories and their experiences. I did not meet any of them who were models. None of them were models. So that is my own invention. However, there are a lot of models who live on Miami Beach. It's considered one of the staging areas for international models. That they send models to different cities, and sometimes they shift them around the world, and they'll bring models from Europe and they'll send them to Miami Beach, and they'll send models from Miami Beach to New York, and so on. And there are apartments that are kept in Miami Beach, which are really not very glamorous, where they put the models up. So I spent some time talking to these girls as well. And I found a very interesting overlap between the street kid culture and the model culture. The models probably ate much worse than the street kids did, much less. And they're, these famished girls all living together. It's really scary, actually. And a number of them did this kind of pickup work where they would be out on the beach, and they send scouts, they send modeling scouts out to the sand, and they'll walk around and they'll look at people out there, and every now and then they'll just say, "You over here, come on, let's go talk." And they'll audition people. They don't do it regularly, but it is a way that scouts will find models, and they recruit them. So that is a true thing. Modeling temporary tattoos, not that I know of. Not that I know of. But tattooing is a huge part of the Miami Beach culture, as it is in many, many parts of the country and the world now. So I started thinking about that. Like, wouldn't it be interesting if you had somebody who was hired to actually model tattoos, and how would that work? It couldn't be permanent, or, what would that mean? So that was my own kind of invention. Yeah. Yes.
Now I'm interested, speaking of looks for a moment.
Yes.
So what did you wear? What did you say? How did you identify yourself when you were starting to talk to the street kids?
Oh yeah.
I'm sure you thought about it.
I did. I thought about it a lot, actually. I dressed kind of, as a writer who spends a lot of time working at home, I'm usually in kind of grunge wear anyway. Grunge wear. It's a new genre. So I dressed as much like a kid as I could from my elder perspective. And so I went to a number of the high schools, in my jeans and t-shirts. And I have some friends who do teach in the Miami school system. And I asked if I could speak to their classes. And I talked to about 3 different classes, and I told them what I was doing. I described the book, and I described my project and how I wanted to learn more about the street kid culture. And then people started talking to people. And I got names and introductions, and some of the kids took me to the beach, and many kids knew kids who'd run away, kids who'd come back. I went to the shelter, and the kids at the shelter took me to some of these actual squats. And, I was afraid maybe they would just see me as some kind of a weirdo who was, violating their privacy and just really freeze me out. But, it was really amazing. One thing I found was that a number of them felt like, they don't describe themselves as runaways. A number of them describe themselves as throwaways, because their parents kick them out, or there's alcoholism or drug abuse, or violence in the homes, And a lot of these kids were running for their lives, for their very lives, you know, and they felt convinced that if they hadn't left home, they wouldn't be alive, you know, that this was a kind of a last resort. And they didn't trust the system. They were afraid of foster care and juvenile detention. And so a lot of them worked very hard at staying undetected because they were so afraid of what, you know, our wonderful systems would end up doing with them. And, you know, so many of them were just so eager to talk. They just wanted to tell their stories. I had no problem getting people, these young people, to open up. They just wanted to, you know, share their experiences and relate to somebody and connect with someone in a meaningful way. And so it was really kind of touching, actually, really amazing. And I heard some fantastic stories. So it was a, you know, weirdly, ironically, it was a great experience. And one that it was much easier to collect information and research from the street kids than it was to collect information from, say, the corporate real estate attorneys, who I also, you know, was researching for this book. Yeah, you know, going to talk to developers and going to city commission meetings and zoning board hearings and, oh my Lord, and people treating me like I was going to, you know, press charges against them at any moment or report them to the FBI or something. So that was a much more difficult form of collecting research than the other. So you never know. Yes?
I guess I'm curious, and obviously I want to read the book and to see what you did, but with the whole idea of Bird of Paradise and the character of the daughter, about how possibly that the parents or the mother didn't really see her,
Yes.
just saw the outside.
Yes.
And having a teenage daughter myself, what's difficult is I think that the daughter sometimes doesn't know her genuine self. So it's like it's changing every day. And so it's this battle. So you're constantly praising the outside stuff.
Right, right.
And then sometimes you're worried that you might not like the inside stuff. But it's this constant battle, and it's exhausting, and I didn't know if that played out at all. Or...
Very much so, very much so. Yeah, there's, you know, there's a lot of discussion in the book about how people connect with each other and what are the things that they value, and how, you know, the mother in the book has a very clear idea of what she wants her daughter to be, what she hopes she'll be, and the daughter doesn't really fit that. You know, even though she looks the part, she looks really pretty. And that delights her mother. But her mother is also hoping that she'll be a girly girl and that they'll shop together and that they'll have this whole experience that she has in her head of the ideal mother-daughter relationship, which she didn't have herself either. And she doesn't fit. And the one who does fit some of that is her son. But she doesn't like that because she doesn't want the son to be that. So there's this constant struggle between what we hope for, what we kind of create in our own imaginations of how it's going to go, and then who you end up with, which you never know. Yeah. So yeah, I love that stuff. Yeah, it's fascinating.
That's crazy, but yeah.
Yeah. It is. It's intriguing.
Yeah, it's funny because I was going to get back also to the singing part, because in the language of baklava, which we loved,
Excellent.
it seemed like you felt that way as a girl, that you weren't really seen, but for different reasons.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's interesting that you get back to that theme of how you're seen, and you had a close relationship with your parents, but in some ways, especially your father, he didn't see who you really were at first.
Yeah, it's really true. A lot of there's a lot of me. Well, I think our books give us away. Our books are like dreams. And, so you can always see the person in there somewhere floating around in the background. I did actually leave home at a very early age. I didn't run away in the technical sense, but I skipped a couple grades of school, and then I went to college when I was just barely 16. So I was drawing a lot on those early feelings of being alone in the world and how scary and exciting and weird it was. In my case, it was a good thing because I had been raised by such a traditional, kind of patriarchal, strict father, and when I left home, he made a long list of things that I was not allowed to do. It's like 100 things on this list that, yes, it became my checklist, Oh, I didn't try that one. But, yeah, Dad tried that. And so for me, it was really a good thing to do. And it turned out great, and it really actually improved my relationship with my father, ironically, but actually it makes sense, because I needed the room to breathe. I needed the room to grow. Felice needs something different, but she's looking for something. She's looking for substance, and she's looking for meaning in herself and in her life. So even though as people, as individuals, we were searching for different things, a lot of those same feelings are there. A lot of it is just writing from that sense of urgency and what it's like to be a young person, especially a young girl. To be a young girl, there's something just a hair scary about being a girl alone on your own when you're not quite ready to be. Yeah. Yes.
Your writing process. Well, two questions. What are you reading? And then your writing process. Like, do you start at the beginning and end at the end? And then how do you write? You wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to write 4 hours today?
Oh, boy. Well, let's see. I'm reading. I'm reading. Right now, I'm teaching. I'm teaching a class, even as we speak, back in Portland. I am teaching a class in the art of writing the novel. So for that class, I assign a lot of books. And I assign books that I think are interesting from a formal perspective, like that you can look at the craft and the way that they've achieved the effects that they did. So we're reading Super Sad True Love Story, Gary Steingart, really an interesting, fascinating book for voice. We're looking at A Visit from the Goon Squad, Jennifer Egan. We're looking at Olive Kittredge. Love that book. To look at character and the development of character. And it changes. It changes every year, the kinds of books that I'm kind of fascinated by and chewing over right now. And actually at the moment I'm reading We Have to Talk About Kevin, Lionel Shriver book. It's a story told from the perspective of a mother, the mother of a kid who shoots his classmates. Yeah, and it's wild. It's wild. And she's like the original anti-mother. So it's a hair-raising book. And then my writing process is, there's the pre-baby and post-baby answer to that. So pre-baby, it was much more disciplined. And then post-baby, I'm very opportunistic. Let me put it that way. I look for ways to fit in writing. So naps are really big. Love the naps, although I want the nap now. And I do things like I carry pen and paper with me and I take them everywhere And if I come early to a meeting, I sit down and I'll try to write. If I'm in a car, I'm not driving, but stopped at a light, you know, I might jot something down. If I'm cooking, I might write something down. I often write when I can't sleep at night. And in some ways, it's made me more disciplined because I also have a babysitter who comes in for a few hours every day. And those hours, it's like, you know, I'll be darned if I'm going to waste that time that I'm paying for somebody. So when she's in the afternoons, I sit down and write, you know, or work on some aspect of it. It's just not as much as it used to be. So right now, it's very much determined by those schedules. Our daughter's going to be starting preschool, yay! This year, so I can hardly wait. I'm really, really excited about that. And so is she. We made sure she's super excited about school. Yes?
The relationship of mother-daughter is important in this book. You mentioned your father, but what is your relationship with your mother?
Oh, you know, my mother, I feel like I wouldn't be a writer if I didn't have the mother that I have. My mother is, as professionally, she was a reading teacher. And she didn't cook. And my father is a big cook. He loves, he's obsessed with cooking. And so when I was growing up, Dad would do the cooking and Mom would do the cleaning. Well, it was funny, actually. My dad would sit at the dinner table after dinner and he would start to tell stories. He and his brothers would sit around, they'd tell stories, and Mom would collect the dishes. And she would always say, "And now the Arabs will tell their stories, and the Irish Catholic will do the dishes." And so I learned that it's much better to be the storyteller. But she taught me to be a good listener. She doesn't tell that many stories. She's really shy. She doesn't like to occupy center stage, but she's a good listener and she's a great reader. And I really believe that developing the habits of listening and reading are the greatest educators when it comes to learning how to write. Those two places, you just can't replace them. So yes, my mom, you know, she likes to refer to herself as a saint, and so, you know, she's like the polar opposite of my dad, and it's so interesting to see their two personalities that play. One's very loud, dramatic, completely egomaniacal, and the other one is very soft-spoken, very gentle, very thoughtful, but also like she's got hidden, you know, a hidden gun in her pocket. She's got a little scabbard, a little sword that she can pull out at any moment. So they have a really interesting kind of connection. They've been married for 50 years now, so yeah, I know. Yeah, yes.
Does your dad still have a restaurant in upstate New York?
Oh. You read the language of baklava. You're in the group? Okay, all right, you guys. I talk about, in the language of baklava, I tell the story about how my father's big obsession all his life is to own his own restaurant. That's all he wanted. And then he retired early when he was in his 50s, and he went ahead and he bought a whole golf course, basically, because it had a little shack of a restaurant attached to it. And he had it, you know, after years, I cannot tell you, my entire growing up life of longing for this restaurant. He had it for 4 years and sold it. He didn't like it. He didn't like owning a restaurant. So, you know, it's a good cautionary tale about be careful what you wish for.
Was the format for the language of baklava based on MFK Fisher at all?
she's a big inspiration for me. I looked at different food memoirs and food writers, definitely MFK Fisher, Ruth Reichel, very helpful. There's a writer, Patty Volk, who writes about food a lot. Interesting kind of combination of food and memoir. And also other memoirists. I forget the author's name. She wrote Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight.
Alexander Fuller.
That's it, Alexander Fuller. Yeah, that book was really very helpful in terms of understanding how to structure it, putting it together in voice. Mary Carr, her memoir. I looked at a lot of different kinds of memoirs to help me get a handle on how to structure it and what the voices were. But MFK Fisher, she's kind of the saint. She's the patron saint of the movement. Yeah. Yes.
Without giving it away to too many people who haven't read the book, I found Solange, unsettling. I couldn't understand. I mean, on one level, I could understand her role in the novel, but why you had her disappearing and her husband's franticness. I didn't understand what that was paralleling.
Okay. Not to get, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to talk about this without giving away too much. She's a character that came to me when I was thinking about originally putting the book together. I was thinking about the Willa Cather novel, My Antonia. In My Antonia, the narrator becomes really entranced by this neighbor who moves out into the prairie with her family, and she's from another country, another culture, and they do things all differently from the narrator and his family. And by studying her, by studying someone who's deeply different from himself, he learns a lot. He grows a lot through the experience of watching this girl. And her life is really hard. She really struggles and she works hard, and it's kind of a tough life. And he does pretty well, actually. And I was interested in how we can grow. Often we can grow and have so much more richness in our lives from such unexpected places, and meeting people or becoming friendly with people that we wouldn't necessarily imagine ourselves being friends with. So I was thinking a lot about that, about difference, basically. And my family and we live in Coral Gables, and Coral Gables is very much like Anglo-Latin enclave. Like, that's who lives there. And there was a farmer's market, the Coral Gables farmer's market, and one day I went to it, and there was a table set up from Haiti. They were selling bush tea and herbal remedies. And it was so interesting watching the people make this wide berth around the table, like they were afraid that they were going to cast spells, or they had some kind of magic going on there, or some kind of superstition, or something was just leading people way away from this table, and they looked completely exotic, and they were wrapped up in, colorful prints and scarves, and they were playing some reggae, and it just was like freaking the people out. And so I went over, I was really intrigued, I was really interested, and I started thinking about this. What if someone from this culture came into a place like Coral Gables to live? How would that impact the neighborhood? How would that impact the characters? And so Solange, in a way, she doesn't get to have her own voice. She is someone who you see mediated by the perspective of the other characters, particularly Avis. And I think Avis kind of idealizes her. She romanticizes her a little. She's not a completely, fully, three-dimensional character, because she's a bit of a dream. She's a bit of a fantasy, and she's a bit of that that thing that's out there in the world that helps Avis, that helps the looker, the watcher, grow and become richer in kind. But I can't answer too much of your question without giving too much
We have
away.
time for one more question.
Okay, one more question? Okay.
I sort of had two, but you can answer either one.
Okay.
One is, how did writing the book work on your fear of losing a job? And, I just blanked on the second question, so.
Oh, well, there you self-selected. It worked. It worked. We have a 3-year-old. So it was, it was good. It was good to go through that process. It was good to face that fear and to really think about, what a person needs to go through to make a big dramatic change in their lives. And it took a lot. It took a lot for us to change. I changed first, and then I had to beat my husband into submission. So we had to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. Well, mostly it was me talking and him going, ugh. And so it really took a lot for us to get to the place where we were ready to do it. And by writing the book, it was a great way to really deeply investigate an emotional question. I think there's nothing quite like writing about an issue, whether it's in a journal or an article or some kind of reflection. There's something about committing a question to the page that, at least for myself, I find really takes me to the deepest levels of contemplation. So. Thank you so much for coming.